On this Tuesday night, accusations of jeopardizing national security by spilling secrets. The charge is against a former nuclear power plant worker. Relief for your wallet as inflation takes a tumble.
You've got to pay your workers more.
Which prices fell, what's still soaring, and what it could mean for interest rates. With Alexei Navalny's silence signals his grieving widow will now take on Russia's president. Plus, how the U.S. plans to hold Russia accountable for Navalny's death. And critics call it Tinder for kids, the new app alarming safety experts and parents.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. A court case is unfolding in Ontario involving a former employee of the Crown Corporation that operates Ontario nuclear plants. He's been charged with leaking information that could harm Canada. The man used to work for Ontario Power Generation, which operates Ontario's nuclear plants, and has been charged under the Rarely Used Security of Information Act for allegedly sharing safeguarded information. In our top story tonight, Mercedes Stephenson lays out exactly what the former employee is believed to have done and what the impact was on security.
James Mussoli, a former employee of Ontario Power Generation, or OPG, is facing a rare charge under the Security of Information Act, accused of deliberately leaking safeguarded information that could harm Canada. A man with the same name appeared on a list of provincial employees describing him as a nuclear operator for OPG in 2022. A source with knowledge of the investigation told Global News Mussoli posted information related to nuclear security vulnerabilities in online postings that were public. OPG denied the leaks had compromised public safety, saying immediately upon identifying an information breach, OPG and the RCMP implemented measures to mitigate and manage any further unauthorized disclosure. Former RCMP investigator Gary Clement says the alleged breach could still carry significant implications for Canada.
It really puts us in bad light with our international neighbors at, the Five Eyes, for instance, because they're starting to look at us and say, well, we can't keep our house in order.
Ontario's nuclear plants are a critical source of energy in the province. They require robust safety and security measures to prevent breaches that could have catastrophic consequences. Approach a nuclear plant without authorization, and you're apt to be met by armed security. And to work inside, you need a security clearance. This case is unfolding in Oshawa, Ontario, a city sandwiched between Pickering and Darlington nuclear plants, both of which are located in densely populated areas and less than 100 kilometers from Toronto. Mussoli could face a life sentence if convicted. None of the charges have been proven in court. This is the second high-profile charge under the Security of Information Act. The other was Cameron Ortis, the former head of RCMP Intelligence, who was convicted of leaking top-secret information to police targets and sentenced to 14 years in prison, including the time already served before his trial. Donna?
All right, Mercedes in Ottawa, thanks. There is some good news about the rising cost of living. Canada's inflation rate slowed at the start of 2024. Inflation in January was 2.9%, a drop from 3.4% in December. Most analysts were expecting it to hover at about that same level. It is now getting closer to the Bank of Canada's 2% target. And Gaviola explains what fueled the slowdown and what it could mean for interest rates in the weeks ahead.
You can thank gas prices, which were the main driver of inflation tumbling for the month of January. Inflation is a comparison, so the fact that prices at the pumps were climbing rapidly a year ago means that the latest inflation read is tamer in comparison.
It was good news for consumers, for businesses, and for the Bank of Canada, and I think we could all use some good news.
Airfares tumbled by more than 14%. And food inflation came down to levels we haven't seen since the fall of 2021. In fact, some of the big price breaks were on items used to make a BLT sandwich. Bacon cost 8.4% less, the price of tomatoes down nearly 10%, and lettuce more than 18% cheaper. But the cost of food in restaurants remained elevated, rising 5%.
Operating a business is really challenging right now. You've got increased costs, you've got higher insurance, you've got higher rent, you've got to pay your workers more.
One area where costs remain stubbornly high, shelter. Whether it's higher mortgage costs taking an increasingly big bite out of household budgets or soaring rents.
It's not like the old days, so I guess we just have to tighten our belts and do what we can.
Despite inflation remaining higher than desired in November and December, if January's dip continues, we may see monetary easing from the central bank.
We are optimistic that the Bank of Canada will start bringing down interest rates sometime this year, hopefully sooner rather than later, but that is their decision to make.
At this point, we're expecting rates to come down in the spring.
I think we're most likely going to see those rates decrease, hopefully by the summer, if not the early fall.
The central bank's next move depends on how our economy is performing. Will we be resilient following in the footsteps of the U.S. or need support like the U.K. and Japan, two G7 economies which fell into recession in the second half of last year? Donna?
And the cost of food coming down is certainly welcome after Canada's big grocery store chains have been defending their prices and profits. What did Loba announce today?
Canada's largest grocery retailer has plans to dominate even more of the Canadian grocery landscape. It's building 40 new stores and renovating 700 of its existing 2,500 stores across the country. The price tag, roughly $2 billion, and the company says it will create 7,500 jobs. Now, the company is doing this against the backdrop of a political battle over a grocery code of conduct, a voluntary set of federal rules that supporters say will help level the playing field for suppliers and smaller grocers. Loba and Walmart are refusing to sign on. Loba says the code of conduct could result in higher prices for consumers. But the House of Commons committee studying food prices has said it will make the code law if Loba or Walmart don't sign on. Donna?
All right, Anne Gaviola in Toronto, thank you. The American president says his administration is planning major sanctions against Russia in response to the death of opposition politician Alexei Navalny on Friday. Joe Biden has said there is no doubt Russian President Vladimir Putin was behind the death of Putin's most vocal critic. Who can hold Russia accountable, though, is unclear. As Redmond Shannon reports, authorities there still haven't even released Navalny's body, despite pleas from his mother.
Alexei Navalny's mother lays flowers at a memorial devoted to political prisoners in a town close to the penal colony where her son died 4 days ago. Lyudmila Navalnaya has been told his body will not be released for 2 weeks.
Я обращаюсь к вам, Владимир Путин.
I appeal to you, Vladimir Putin. Let me finally see my son, so that I can bury him decently.
Navalny's wife, Yulia Navalnaya, alleges his body is being kept until traces of, quote, another Putin Novichok disappear. She was referring to the Russian nerve agent that tests suggested was used to poison Navalny in 2020. The Kremlin called Navalnya's words unsubstantiated, obnoxious accusations. Western leaders have joined her in blaming Putin. The US ready to respond.
I told you we'd be announcing sanctions on Russia. We'll have a major package announced on Friday.
The White House says these latest sanctions will target defense and industrial bases. Some argue 2 years of sanctions against Russia have done little to halt Putin's war in Ukraine.
Sanctions rather have a longer-term weakening effect on the Russian economy. The Biden administration erred, I think, in over-optimistic rhetoric.
Daniel Fried was US sanctions coordinator in the Obama administration. He says there are many unexplored avenues, including the extreme option of giving frozen Russian assets to Ukraine.
That's not easy. A lot of people say it's a violation of this or that legal norm. Well, my sympathy for the Russians is under control.
A sanctions package was reportedly being assembled anyway to coincide with Saturday's second anniversary of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
The United States has again vetoed a widely supported UN resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
The message given today to Israel with this veto is that it can continue to get away with murder.
The U.S. was the only Security Council member to vote against the resolution. The U.K. abstained. Yesterday, the U.S., Israel's staunchest ally, circulated its own draft resolution calling for a temporary ceasefire linked to the release of all remaining hostages. All UN Security Council members have expressed grave concern of a humanitarian catastrophe if Israel were to move ahead with its planned ground offensive in the southern Gaza city of Rafah, where an estimated 1.5 million Palestinians have sought refuge. A second day of hearings took place at the International Court of Justice over Israel's occupation of the Palestinian territories. The UN General Assembly asked the court more than a year ago for a non-binding opinion on the consequences of Israel's practices in the region. Canada was to be one of 50 countries presenting arguments, but has cancelled its plans. Israel is not attending the hearings, though it has sent written remarks. Canada's security intelligence community is sounding the alarm about anti-Semitic violence in this country. In a report obtained by Global News, the Integrated Terrorism Assessment Centre says anti-Semitic hate crimes in Canada rose by 182% between 2015 and 2022. And incidents increased dramatically after the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel last year. As Jeff Semple explains, Jewish groups say those hate crimes are going unchecked and are being fueled by hate speech coming from our own backyard.
Every Friday, Imam Yunus Kathrada speaks to his followers in Victoria and online, using language like this.
And now we see the criminal Jews, the Zionists, we see how they are fighting our brothers in Palestine.
Kathrada has praised Hamas fighters and asked God to destroy the plundering and criminal Jews, while also condemning the LGBTQ community and atheists.
The non-Muslims are the enemies of Allah. Therefore, they are your enemies.
Kathrada preaches hate.
This national Jewish advocacy group has filed a police complaint. So has a city councillor. Victoria police are investigating, but no charges have been laid.
Any comment at all?
Approached by Global News, Kathrada didn't respond. On Facebook, he called the media anti-Islam, anti-Muslim, and straight-up dishonest who twist people's words, urging journalists to hold their breath for a response.
The corporate media has no problem with lying.
After October 7th, Kathrada used a false claim by an Israeli reporter that 40 babies had been beheaded to question the entire story about the Hamas attack.
Most of what they say are mere lies. They are a propaganda machine.
This nonprofit that tracks anti-Semitism online says they've witnessed an explosion of hatred, including October 7th denialism.
A very concerted effort to deny that these events ever happened, and even more so to say that Israel was behind the October 7th massacre.
They highlighted 300 examples, many from Canada, viewed on social media 25 million times. Only around 9% had been removed.
October 7th denial is being platformed for millions of people.
Those concerns are echoed in this CSIS report on violent anti-Semitic extremism. It warned influencers are using social media platforms to spread violent rhetoric and denial narratives. An earlier threat assessment specifically mentioned Yunus Kathrada and his calls for God to destroy those who slander the prophet.
The words can lead to real-world violence. He should not have a platform.
Kathrada has denied ever calling for violence. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
Global News will air a special report, Rising Hate, Anti-Semitism in Canada. You can watch it right here on Saturday at 7 p.m. A new warning to parents coming up, the app that's being described as Tinder for kids. A father in BC has a warning for other parents after what happened to his son. The boy died by suicide after being lured into so-called online sextortion, extorting money or sexual favors from someone through online threats and blackmail. As well, Canada's watchdog for child exploitation has raised the alarm about a new app that has millions of users. As Jamie Dahl explains, it's described as Tinder for kids, and a warning her story contains disturbing content.
He wore it like a permanent fixture on his young face. It's hard to find an image where Carson Cleland isn't smiling.
He was the light of our lives. He was that kid that everybody kind of went to.
4 months ago, the world lost him, and the smile that brought so much joy has now been replaced with blinding sorrow.
Every day I die inside a little more. We didn't only lose a son, I lost my absolutely best friend. And I've never felt so alone in my life.
The 12-year-old from Prince George died by suicide after becoming a victim of sextortion online. RCMP say someone convinced him to send private pictures and then began threatening him.
he sent pictures, and then they decided to tell him either you send me money or gift cards, or we're going to post this to your friends list, all your social media.
Not even 12 hours after the ordeal began, he texted his parents his final, "I love you."
I called him within 8 seconds of him texting me that, because it just something wasn't right, and he didn't answer. He didn't frickin' answer. The sheer panic that must have went through that poor little boy's head, the fear and the shame, it's frickin' terrible.
The Canadian Centre for Child Protection says the number of sextortion cases involving kids is growing at an alarming rate.
We have about 10 reports per day coming in to cybertip.ca related to this type of activity.
It's now warning parents about a particular danger, a digital application called Wiz. Some are describing it as a Tinder-like app for kids. Canada's watchdog for child exploitation is urging parents to remove it from their children's devices.
We've been able to create an underage account, and certainly as soon as we created that underage account, we were solicited right away with requests for sending nude images and requests to connect for sexual purposes.
The organization says reports about Wiz increased faster than any other platform, and boys were victimized in 93% of the cases. In January, the app was removed from Google and Apple app stores over child safety concerns. But it reappeared in Apple's platform last week after reportedly making changes to the platform. Global News reached out to the app but did not hear back. Ryan Cleland is urging parents to talk to their children.
People love you way more than you're ever going to be embarrassed. And you can get through anything as long as you speak out and talk to somebody.
Words he wishes every minute of the day he could have said to his boy. Jamie Dahl, Global News, Calgary.
Growing anger ahead why so many farmers are losing patience. There's growing frustration among farmers in multiple countries. They've taken to the streets in Europe and in India, and there is a common theme. Farmers say they can't afford to farm anymore and that governments aren't listening. Eric Sorensen looks at what's driving their anger.
Farmers in Greece are the latest to take to the streets over rising costs. In Poland, farmers are blocking roads to stop cheap grain imports crossing the border from Ukraine. In India, massive protests over minimum crop price guarantees and promises made nearly a year after protests ended in 2021. Farmers are preparing heavy equipment to get past security forces that blocked their way to the capital on Friday. In Rome, cowbells clanged with a simple message: farmers feed the world but can't afford to farm. Money goes to foreign countries, he says, to Ukraine, to migrants, but never to farmers. In Prague, one other sentiment seems universal among farmers: governments aren't listening. I'm absolutely dissatisfied with how government deals with us, he says.
A real sense about farmers that they feel excluded from the policy process.
This expert says while governments focus on climate change, farmers have lost some of the political influence they once had.
A sense that farmers have been disproportionately burdened and being asked to do a disproportionate share of adjusting in order to meet different types of emission targets.
In Canada, there are fewer environmental regulations, but farmers do feel a disconnect with Ottawa.
Their main mandate is all about the environment. And so they've been pushing forward all kinds of policies like fertilizer reduction and not allowing certain pesticides and chemicals.
The specific issues differ in Canada, but green policies and higher costs have farmers here feeling squeezed too.
Lower output prices, higher input costs, and a consumer sentiment that's being reflected by the federal government to say, do everything that you're doing, but cleaner and more environmentally friendly.
To avoid the type of confrontations now happening around the globe, Skolrud says the lesson for Canadian policymakers is to work to satisfy farmers' needs while adapting to a greener future in this country. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
Refusing to be silenced next, Alexei Navalny's wife stands up to the Kremlin. In Russia today, such is the fear of the power of Alexei Navalny, even in death, that hundreds of people mourning him publicly have been arrested. It's as if President Vladimir Putin wants the memory of Navalny erased. Alexei Navalny has been silenced, but not his wife, Yulia.
Привет, это Юлия Навальная.
She is Vladimir Putin's new enemy, Yulia Navalnaya. For 23 years devoted to quietly supporting her husband's political ambitions, now she's taking up his torch. Her grief still raw, she is steely in her resolve.
Путин убил отца моих детей. Путин отнял самое дорогое, что у меня было.
She has no doubt Navalny's death in a Russian prison was murder. He was an ambitious politician who promised a brighter future for Russia and who exposed corruption at the highest levels of Putin's government. His investigations getting tens of millions of views online. At rallies and court hearings, she was always at his side. And as his star rose, the Kremlin's crackdown intensified. He was sprayed with a green chemical in 2017 and then poisoned with a nerve agent in Siberia. It was Yulia who got him to a German hospital and helped him heal. And it was she who supported his defiant return to Moscow. An act of bravery they both knew could end in his arrest. And it was she who accepted an Academy Award in 2023 for a documentary about his life. Navalny's love, his closest confidant, signaling she will now take on Putin.
Убив Алексея, Путин убил половину меня.
By killing Alexei, Putin killed half of me, she says, half of my heart and half of my soul. But I still have the other half, and it tells me not to give up. And that is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. The Solovetsky Stone in Moscow is a monument to victims of political repression, and it's a place Russians are paying tribute to Alexei Navalny almost as soon as they lay flowers and light candles, though officials clear them away. Thanks for watching.